Hello and welcome to episode 7 of My Cyber Why. In this series, we talk to people who are working in cybersecurity to help protect the world and protect data and to protect people and citizens. So there's a lot of focus on the bad guys and what the criminals do. And at My Cyber Why, we're turning the light on the great people who are doing work to keep us safe online. Today's guest is Sarah Mainwaring. She is a PhD student currently at the University of Warwick, and we're just really excited to have you here today. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, good morning, Diana.
Morning. So, Sarah, could you just kick us off with a little bit about who Sarah is?
Yeah, sure. My name's Sarah. I'm currently in DC, usually based at Warwick, but I'm very lucky to have a 6-month placement in DC at the moment. So I'm just enjoying that, experiencing the books, the culture, the kind of cafe scene too. Just kind of really enjoying getting to know a new, fun, vibrant city.
Yes, yes, and DC in the summer too. So you're very brave.
Absolutely. I've never spent a summer in a swamp, but I mean, I guess it's the first time for everything.
It's a beautiful city, even in the
Really
summer.
is, yeah.
So what is it that you do? So you're both a PhD candidate right now at University of Warwick.
Yeah.
And you're also doing this internship or study at the.
It's a research fellowship. So I mean, you're totally right. I'm in my 3rd year of 4 of my PhD, of which I do in the UK. But I was lucky enough to get a 6-month placement as a Kluge Fellow at the Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. So I get to sit in the Jefferson Building every day, just by the Supreme Court, and just really talk about and think about my PhD, which is actually amazing because I look at the political history of encryption in both the UK and America from 1950s to 2020. So it's kind of going to finish up next year. And so being based in DC and in particular in the Jefferson Building right next to Capitol Hill is absolutely amazing because I really get a sense of, the how Congress works, who was there. Just the whole environment just seems, just so inspiring, really, and exciting.
And do you think that there's going to be a lot of intersection between cryptography and governments, not just U.S. and our, but just governments around the world? Do you see a lot of intersection?
And actually, I would say there always has been. I mean, cryptography, this is kind of what I look at. Cryptography started as the preserve of government. It was only ever used by governments because they were the only ones who needed it. Computing was expensive, it was complicated, and actually encryption was difficult to do. It was manual. So in the 1950s and 60s, it was only used by kind of big governments and kind of the diplomatic circles. And really, since about the 1970s, 80s, and really early 90s, everybody now uses it. It's in our smartphones, it's in our computers, it's in our fridges, and it kind of underlines, many of the train and networks and the kind of national grid systems that we all now rely on. And really, what I try and kind of trace is how that happened and what happened. And this is usually understood as kind of the crypto wars. So it's usually understood as kind of the privacy activists really campaigning and winning against this kind of spying and overbearing government. And I try and kind of reanalyze that and reimagine it, really, because there was so much, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s, this really, when the market for encryption began to develop and when private companies and other organizations began to do it, the private sector influenced encryption policy, I would argue, significantly and substantially, and they continue to do that. I think it's important to understand that because, the whole debate over, the recent Apple versus FBI debate was centered on this idea that government want to create a backdoor into an encryption. And okay, there may be a case to say that they do want to do that, but only focusing on the privacy and surveillance aspects just overlooks all of these kind of economic, market-driven ideas, which are so important.
Yeah, it's true. And it sounds like we're getting a little bit into what motivated you, but when you were an undergraduate student and you were thinking, and what did you study undergrad?
So I did political science and IR. So if I could tell anybody one thing that I've learned in the last 4 years, it's that to be involved in encryption or cyber, you do not have to be a mathematician. I used to be terrified of going to speak to people. I've spoken to some incredible cryptographers and I continue to do so. And it's amazing to hear their stories actually over the last kind of 50, 60 years. But really, it's about so much more than the algorithm and so much more than maths. It's understanding how people people work together. Fundamentally, encryption is about trust. It's about who people think are responsible and are the legitimate authority to control these schemes and kind of be developing them. So really, that's kind of, I never thought I would do a PhD, and I certainly didn't think I would do one in such a technical discipline, but it's just so exciting, actually. I mean, I have always enjoyed maths. I'm kind of a bit strange like that, but, really the fusion of the technology and the geopolitics on a kind of international domain is what really drew me to the whole idea of encryption. And as it became more international and you really had to think post-Cold War about new ways of doing things. That's really what kind of motivates and, does kind of encourage me to just continue doing this.
Yeah. And what are you trying to, so your why is you're seeing this intersection between geopolitics and encryption. And what are you hoping with your thesis and with your research? What are you hoping to, impact the world as you're studying the history of encryption? What are you hoping to uncover or maybe guide?
I think principally what I really would like to do is just reimagine a lot of the myths that are kind of dominating in this space. I think cyber in particular is such an emotive word. Encryption, backdoor, surveillance, they're so emotional and so emotive, and rightly so. They should be, because we're dealing with important things. But actually, there's a really complex and interesting history here that unless we understand it a little bit more than we currently do in the kind of public domain, we're not really going to understand how encryption and things like end-to-end and WhatsApp and all this kind of thing, we're just not going to understand who the responsible and legitimate authorities to be involved in these things are. And I think they're important questions because, as we go forward, we're going to need to rely on these things so much more. And even in terms of elections, how do you re-establish trust in things like elections and democratic institutions, because the social and the legal things that we've always relied on seem to be breaking down. So it really touches on so many things, but principally I'd like to kind of re-understand what happened, so kind of dispel myths. And actually just, I probably won't change the world with my thesis, but if more than 5 people read it, then I'd be happy, because it's kind of 4 years well spent. And 2 people have to read it because my supervisors have to. So, we'll, with me as well, that's already 3. But anyway, I just would like to try and, get people to understand that there is so much more involved here. And also, you don't have to be a technical mathematician to be involved in this. That's one of the things I enjoy about it, is talking to people. You can understand how people relate and why the systems were made ultimately.
That's a great point, is that a lot of, and I think you're just so spot on with that. A lot of us feel like, oh my gosh, it's crypto, it's math, it's confusing, I'm not a cryptographer. But you make such a wonderful set of points about this is impacting privacy and surveillance. And we do have to have policymakers and legal minds and government to take a look at how we're using this. So there's the technical component, but there's this very social component too. So I think it's great. And I'll read your thesis.
Thank you.
I'm excited to read it.
Kind of in addition to what you just said, also the logic of the maths we're talking about isn't that difficult. It's certainly not easy. You do have to kind of apply yourself a little bit, and I've taken various technical courses to give myself a level of confidence in myself in it. But really, once you understand, the public, private keyed ideas and all those kind of things, really, if you're, once you understand those, you are able to do an awful lot. You don't have to get down to the granularity of, oh, this is how I do a hash on a SHA algorithm or something. It's great if you can do that, and I've certainly enjoyed getting to understand those ideas too, but you don't have to get into that granularity, because these bigger ideas actually have never been talked about. We've never discussed, who should be the centralized authority to hold all of the encryption keys. You don't really need a maths degree to understand that, and I'd kind of say you probably don't need one. If you don't have one, you may be able to come up with better ideas for it. I don't know. That's
No, I think that's a great point. Is if we could get more people taking a look at the problem space in general and not just being afraid of the math, then I think we might get, which actually leads us to the last question, which is, how can people get more involved? What would you like people to know? So if there's anything that you've read that you think that is really consumable for people to read, that's really helpful. And also if there's any way, if you're looking for people to help with your research.
I mean, if anyone wants to sit down and talk to me about anything they were involved in, and to do with encryption, were they a mathematician at Rand? Did they do something for a private company? Because really, one of the things I'm trying to understand is where this growth of the private sector interest in encryption came from.
Mm-hmm.
It obviously had a lot to do with market incentives and a real need and an understandable need to use encryption, but no one's really ever written about that. No one talks about it. So that's kind of one thing I'm trying to understand. And really, if you're interested in it, just read things. I mean, most recently I picked up at a secondhand bookstore, actually, Richard Clarke's Cyber War book, which was written in 2010, and that really is a really good, digestible text, I think. I mean, I read it literally over the weekend. It's so easy to read, and it has a really helpful glossary in the back, actually, which kind of explains some of these terrifying ideas like public key and private key and all this kind of stuff. But I think because he's a policymaker and obviously such an experienced one, he is able to communicate that in a good way. So that's probably a good way to start. But otherwise, I mean, just read blogs. Wired is a great one. There's Microsoft published blogs every day. There's similar ones in the UK, and just really read and understand things, and then talk to people. I mean, I wouldn't be anywhere. My PhD couldn't be written unless I had the kindness of other people to sit down and talk to me about these ideas. So really just go off and do that, because unless you have conversations with people, you're not really going to progress ideas anyway. I don't think. But
I totally agree. Okay, so crypto historians, we have the link to get in touch with Sarah if you have something to help her with her research for her PhD on crypto. You can get in touch with her. Also, some great advice on books to read. I would actually add Simon Singh's Code Book if you're really. Speaking of weekend reads, I mean, that's truly, to me, like that was actually a fun read, and I think that a lot of people, if you are afraid of crypto and that, there are really some great resources out there to help get people more involved, because as you say, Sarah, it's important for us to understand the policy and make sure that we're implementing the tech right. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I am excited to read your thesis when it comes out, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us on My Cyber Why.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
All right, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.